welcome. How you doing, Frank? Glad to have you here. We'll be getting started in just a minute. Glad to have you here. Feel free to introduce yourself in the chat, say hey. And while we wait for people to trickle in, maybe we can go around the room and introduce ourselves. Cody, you want to start?
Sure. So Cody Lee, I'm a team lead on our web reliability engineering team. We call it API platform internally. Basically, all of our APIs are Datadog. That's kind of what we're responsible for. It's a large breadth of things. Very SRE also focused. It's exciting and team to work on, particularly.
Cool. Welcome to those of you still joining. Jim, you want to introduce yourself?
Sure. I'm Jim Schindler, one of the engineering managers here at PagerDuty. Similar to Cody, I kind of work on a team that's all about our API. It's called Developer Foundations. So making sure our API is fully featured, and it's fun working with internal teams and external teams, hearing what they want. So yeah, happy to be here.
Cool. Dennis, want to introduce yourself?
Sure. My name is Dennis Poon. Also an engineering manager at PagerDuty. I work with the change team, and we're responsible for a new exciting domain object in PagerDuty called the change event. When things go wrong, you can usually trace them back to a deploy, a config change, or an infra change. And we're the team that helps you track that and correlate that when things are on fire.
Cool. So it sounds like that's a data type. Is it an abstraction data type? You want to?
It's a brand new event. It's very similar to our alert-based events that you're currently sending in with PagerDuty. So it's another one of those data types that you can send in to accompany that.
Gotcha. Okay. Cool. Welcome to everybody joining. Feel free to introduce yourself in the chat. We're going to be spending some time here. Cody from Datadog and Dennis and Jim from PagerDuty, talking a bit about being on call, what kind of tools you use, how it affects your life, how to do it less terribly, how to do it better, potentially. So as you're here, feel free to drop questions, Q&A, ask questions in chat. We'll be happy to take them. But while we do, let's talk a bit about being on call and maybe the first time being on call. Cody, you want to start by maybe sharing an anecdote about the first time you went on call?
Oh, the first time I went on call was long before Datadog. I was starting a startup, and well, you're just kind of part of it. I think the more notable anecdote is starting on call at Datadog was, well, let's do it. Let's have some fun. My learning style is learn by fire, and there was some fire for sure.
Gotcha. Yourself, I think maybe Jim, you have a prior story?
Yeah, actually my first job was like right out of college, and one of the few companies that started with PagerDuty like out of the box. Maybe one of the first 100 customers or something, but it was doing medical billing, and so they were collecting payments themselves, and so the nightly job ran 3 a.m. and if it didn't run successfully, someone had to get paged and make sure those payments went through, because otherwise we weren't getting paid. So it was very stressful on call. But yeah, I remember getting paged for the first time at 2:30 in the morning, like, oh gosh, the job failed. There's revenue on the like literally revenue on the line. What do we do next? And thankfully it was just a quick like resubmission. But yeah, for that job it was like crucial, right? Like revenue was literally on the line if we didn't get that job done.
Gotcha. I think being on call and knowing that there's an event going on, there's a major business process happening. We mentioned Black Friday. Knowing that there's kind of that added pressure of existing business process can really be psychologically intimidating. Do you guys practice any sort of code freezes or anything when you guys do know like there's a Black Friday coming up or anything along those lines?
Yeah, I would say there's definitely like tent poles. Like I think generally the tech community, around especially like Black Friday, but even like I would say that last week in December, I think my camera just went crazy. Yeah, like the kind of downtime where we like to call it hibernation duty at PagerDuty, where we just we don't want to get paged during like major holidays and like have everyone in the business have to communicate to customers that we're out. And it's just a sensitive time for a lot of our companies we work with, closing into the year books and making sure, like you said, like especially retail companies that are delivering all those experiences. Yeah, so like it's something we've done in the past at tentpole places, maybe big conferences that we're putting on or taking part of. Yeah, I would say it's become sort of a normal thing at this point.
Gotcha. And yeah, one of the trade-offs with doing a code freeze is at the end of the code freeze, you have to do a code thaw. And then all of that code you've built up or features you've wanted to release or bug fixes even you've wanted to release kind of tries to go out at the same time. Do you guys have any practices in place to kind of minimize that or any kind of process where you try to deal with that?
Well, yeah, I'd say it's probably not a formal process, but I think informally that the organization knows that this is a period of like a major code thaw. I think there's a term for it. They call it hypercare. So people are paying a lot more attention to their metrics, their graphs, and their alerts. So that having that context on hand, having those procedures in place really helps when you kind of have this thundering herd of code releases all at the same time.
Gotcha. So just having that context and knowing, okay, there's no major events going on right now. We can just focus 100% on stability of our systems and trying to manage this properly. Cool. That brings up another point of the code freeze and the debate of whether or not to do it, which is the psychological state of the people who have to be on call, right? Because anytime you're on call, there's business process, there's something behind you that could potentially break. And the longer you're down, the more the pressure builds, the more the psychological drama builds up in your head as you have to deal with a system as it's been broken. And I really think that trade-off of having to deal with a code thaw versus having to deal with being on call. I know my personal choice would be, let's freeze it. Let's not have me be the one who's on call when everything goes down and we're having a major event. So cool. Cody, why don't you speak a bit about kind of how you approach incident response? What is the first thing that happens for you when you get a page?
Oh, this was fun as I was just dealing with one shortly here, though. We actually have a checklist, some actually training that goes into it too. Part of the rotation is, just announcing that you're here. If you're the IC, the one that's taking over the commander role for that incident. Some other checklists like getting current impact. If it's impacting customers, is it not impacting customers? If it is, how many, how much? And just trying to convey that in the most concise way to our customers so that they're updated, but also internally convey action internally on what we need to do. Is that rollback? Is that do certain actions? Do we have to roll forward? Mostly kind of figuring out what the game plan is for that. As I see there, it's also make sure you have communications with our customer solutions teams as well. So are we getting tickets? Do they know how to respond to this incident? Do you point them to our status page? Those kind of things.
Gotcha. So you mentioned a term there, IC. You mind explaining it to everyone on the call what IC means?
Yeah, certainly. So IC is basically the incident commander is what the acronym stands for. Basically the person that is kind of the person in charge for that incident, mostly just to delegate and help resolve the incident itself. That person is generally not typing on the keyboard, trying to solve the actual bug in flight. Someone else is doing that.
Gotcha. So kind of this center of a spoked wheel, maybe, if I'm hearing it correctly. Okay, cool. To everyone here, thank you for joining. I want to let you know if you have any questions, feel free to drop them in the Q&A. Feel free to introduce yourself in the chat. We're going to be here chatting through our history with on-call, kind of our approaches and what we found works, what we found doesn't. So let's talk a bit about the shift to remote. I know, Datadog has a headquarters in New York, and I know part of Datadog is based in New York headquarters. Jim, maybe what has been the transition for PagerDuty as everybody's gone remote over the past 18 months?
Yeah, it's been I think a graceful transition. It was really good to have the experience working with remote folks prior to everything going fully remote. We had, I think, about 10 or 15% of our team was remote. I actually had a unique experience. Like we just started the Atlanta office, so like within Atlanta itself, it felt like a remote office because everyone was either in San Francisco or Toronto. So got very experienced with being on Zoom and coordinating that way. And I think that like we had all the tooling in place, but especially like as we went remote, it was very clear like we needed to make sure we were using all of our tools effectively. Like in my last company that I was at, we didn't have any like incident management software because we could all just huddle around a desk as a startup. We could, get in and figure out what's going on very quickly. But in today's world, that's not the case. You kind of want something to help you walk through the state of the world of the incident. You can't rely on Joe being a seat next to you or Jane right behind you. It's everyone's remote, so you need to have some platform, I guess, to help you facilitate your incident response process.
Gotcha. And Cody, I think there was previously a dedicated room for incidents at Datadog. Is that still the case? And I know you've been remote for forever at Datadog.
Yeah, for 4.5 something years.
Literally forever.
Yeah, in our New York Times building, we originally had one particular floor, and one of those floors, the room was called Red Alert. Go figure. It's a pretty descriptive name for kind of a war room style of thing. We have a few more floors now, so I'm pretty sure just kind of all the floors get used as necessary. I'm fully remote, and it's definitely interesting seeing those meeting rooms pop back up in Zooms.
Gotcha. And yeah, it seems a big portion of the shape of a response. Now that everybody's remote, it seems the tooling really has to be excellent. Otherwise, you're kind of hosed, because as soon as you need to share access to information, especially everybody being remote first, it's just not as easy to do remotely. So did you see any kind of changes organizationally from either of you as COVID hit and as everybody had to go remote first? Did your tooling reveal any inadequacies, and did you find places where you could just really patch holes?
I'd say like Datadog was pretty well situated. We had a fair amount of remote folks before. Now, obviously, those that were not used to it had to quickly get accustomed to that. I think everyone that was here, both direct or people ops support and individuals themselves, were definitely helpful in every regard, both mental and the technical aspects of the job that changed slightly because of that. I would say in terms of like incident response, it didn't change much. It's just you didn't go to a physical room, you just popped on a Zoom. So Zoom became ever more important during incident response, and also we use Slack, so that as well.
That is, go ahead, Jen.
Oh yeah, I was just gonna chime in. Like I think having the right process around your incident response from the get-go is really key. It helped us tremendously. Like we also, have war room channels, and it's really helpful to have a scribe there. Like you have your incident commander who's kind of running the show, but then have someone who's also relaying for people who just want to follow in the chat, or who can't hop on the call to join what's going on. Like, and especially for postmortem processes, to see when did we actually execute that command. Like having a scribe actually call out when things are happening can be super helpful to reflect on the whole incident itself.
Okay, I think you both touched upon something interesting that we haven't spoken about yet, which is tooling. Once you get a page, it seems like having the context of what's happening is kind of the biggest immediate need. There's an urgency. You've identified that there's an urgent thing happening. Maybe Dennis, you want to talk a bit about context and how you provide context in general about what is happening.
Sure. So I think context matters a lot, depending on your role in incident response. But I think as a responder, What you don't want is for either seeking context or giving context to get in the way of your response. So it's important that your tooling really works with you as you go through. Like, you're already paged, you're under high stress. You don't want to add stress by having you jump between different places or to talk to different folks. So having a tool like Datadog and PagerDuty together, where you get paged in PagerDuty, you can see what kind of Datadog alert or dashboard you can go to investigate and seamlessly jump to that right into kind of your technical response. You can have this all in a very seamless flow, so you don't have to break your own context that you're trying to do a technical diagnosis or resolution, and you still have everything all in one place. It doesn't break your flow.
Gotcha.
Yeah, I'll add to that. Like, even if you need to escalate an incident and get more people involved, having tooling around that, something that I was just paged on is, as soon as you escalate it to a certain level, like it pages occur rotation, which automatically sends a PagerDuty alert, and it has the exact information I need to join the room and get started, which is incredibly helpful.
Yeah, I think that brings up another interesting point or another interesting change, which is kind of the lifestyle changes of when you first go on call, and your tooling and your level of animal instinct response to getting paged, and it seems like there's been a quality of life improvement that doesn't really get talked about much, which is the tooling on mobile getting better. Has anybody here used a cell phone to take an initial look at a page?
Yeah, a lot.
So say definitely, yeah. It's those. Should I really wake up? Do I need to like fully get out of bed, fire up the laptop, or was this a one-off noisy alarm that's been going off? The really nice thing, PagerDuty has their mobile app. I know Datadog has its mobile app, so you can seamlessly go from PagerDuty, click a link, open up the Datadog dashboard on your mobile app, and just see, okay, it was just a floppy alarm. No need to get fully out of bed at this point. Yeah, I think it's pretty crucial for a responder, at least, to have that at the palm of your hand at all times. It gives me confidence too. I can like go walk the dog and at least like keep an eye on things and know that I'm not gonna like be fully out of the loop and need to sprint home to see just what's going on. So
Yeah, I've had cases like this where I've gone to the gym and you have your cell phone on you, but you don't carry your laptop into the gym, and just be able to like quickly diagnose and realize, well, this is actually not really an issue. We can parking lot it and come back to it.
It does sound like a very minor hypothetical thing, but a very massive thing at the same time. Just not having to have that laptop immediately on you, on you still, however, not at all times. Yes, I'm sure that's a little bit psychologically liberating. So speaking of which, how do you guys schedule teams and kind of how do you improve the process and make sure that on call is staying reasonable? How do you determine boundaries there?
I think that's a good feedback mechanism, right? So at least on the teams that I'm on, we like talk about it a lot. Actually, a conversation came up again about holiday scheduling, and so making sure that people have or feel comfortable bringing it up when they need to have conflicts, they need overrides, or they want to talk about how the schedule maybe should change, and however that seems fit. My team, we generally do weekly schedules with a secondary escalation, and they just rotate out. So at the goal there, not being on call more than once every 6 weeks. And that's going to vary team by team, but yeah.
yeah, I would say just being regular about reviewing. Like we have weekly on-call handoff changes on my team, and we review our kind of on-call health and make sure we address anything that comes up and be aggressive about it. I think it's great when you can leave a session and know that either you were able to address anything that was noisy, or the next person that's taking on the rotation is at least aware of it and will have an action plan for how to deal with it. Yeah, just like not missing those check-in points, because it kind of feels like that if you let it go too long, you're like the frog in a boiling pot of water, and it all of a sudden is out of control and you had no idea. So just having those like check-in points, I think is really crucial to make sure your on-call is healthy for your team.
And I think Cody touched upon that and is ensuring that folks are probably on call every 6 weeks. I think as an organization, obviously different folks have different pressures in terms of how many folks you can have on your team, but making it a priority that your staff deep enough, your bench is deep enough, you might need help from other teams, that you can maintain that sustainable rotation. I think it's important to keep that as a priority as an organization to maintain on-call health across the board.
Yeah, absolutely. And also just sometimes in a rain, it absolutely pours, and it's okay to ask for help or someone to sub in if you've had a pretty awful night.
Gotcha. We got a question from the audience. Is there a recommended way of documenting or recording somehow the incident response in real time? And is it an important thing to do?
I feel baited there, but yeah, absolutely important. We definitely have our own internal tooling that we use, and of course now the incident app within Datadog itself to help manage that. Yes, absolutely.
Jim or Dennis?
Yeah, I think it goes back to, like, especially for major incidents, like you want that log of, like, we of course record the call that happened, but it can be tedious to go through that exact call to figure out, like, when was the time that we called for this command to be ran or this new infrastructure to be put up. It can be helpful to have that captured somewhere in your tooling, so you can at least figure out in retrospective what things maybe helped this situation, what things maybe didn't help or maybe worsened it over time. And it can be super helpful just for review purposes to have recorded notes of here's the action we're taking to try to resolve the issue.
Gotcha. So yeah, I think that kind of brings up the idea of overall hygiene, right? How are we ensuring that our processes are getting better? How are we tracking things? How are we improving? How are we measuring ourselves? And I think that Cody kind of touched upon it. Jim, you kind of touched upon it. Let's talk a bit about launching services. If you're going to launch a new service, how do you determine if there should be an on-call, what the on-call should be? How do you guys measure and determine what the amount of resources should be for a new system?
Right. So I think, when you do go launch a new service, I mean, you're almost going to run some hypotheticals in your mind as you're setting up. You're identifying sort of the error cases, or like, what segment of your customers are going to be accessing this feature. And then, based on the thresholds that you identify, you can identify severity levels. Like, if this breaks, it'll mean things are really bad for everyone. Or if these things break, maybe I should be notified. So going through that exercise, like, very methodically, of understanding sort of like the impact and risk profile of your services, and then assigning the appropriate priority levels and then appropriate monitoring and response to that. I think it's super important. But I think as a follow-on, like, this is always your first stab. You're not going to know how that performs until it's out in the wild. So to keep in mind that these are sort of like living and breathing sorts of settings, and you should always be attending to these on a regular basis and adjusting them as necessary.
Yeah, I'd absolutely agree. We actually have a name for it here at Datadog. It's called an API or production readiness review, where it's actually just like a checklist of general things like Dennis just exactly talked about, like, review this. Do you have an on-call schedule? Do you have monitors? Do you have dashboards? And it may seem simple, but just having that little checklist makes sure you don't forget things.
Yeah, and I would just add, like, going through that list, and like, we practice kind of failure Fridays or failure any days where you put your system under a known failure condition, where you can maybe start building out like the run book for, if we happen to see this in the wild, we at least know generally what to do. If a team's using Kafka as a service, they might want to know, like, what happens if we have a bad message in Kafka that we need to skip over, like things that you might encounter in production. Walking through that in a safer environment is super helpful for both, like, your engineers who are going on call for that service, but just like overall, just knowing that you have a healthy service is also great. So +1 to everything Dennis and Cody said, but yeah, putting your system in failure modes can also be an extremely useful way to build out that run book.
Gotcha. And then we do have another question again for everybody attending. Feel free to ask questions. There's a little Q&A tab. Is there any recommended way of documenting or recording incident response in real time? Wait, sorry, we just did that one. Could anybody recommend any tooling? We use the template page on Confluence. So anybody?
So we do have a template page in Confluence, but most notably it's like part of a training process that we have for going on call, being an IC, whether it's like a core IC or more of a team product centered IC kind of thing. Generally the same thing. It's like a simple checklist that you kind of learn and go through it. You go through some shadowing exercises, but tooling for monitoring the incident. Now, obviously we dog food our own product in our incident app. We have a Slack integration for that. So it's really simple to like add things to the like ledger of things that happen in the incident. Creating Zoom calls is pretty simple. So it's pretty straightforward for us to keep things documented. Now, nicely, we can also generate at least the base postmortem for incidents too, which is helpful for a number of things, both lessons learned and customer communications, but it gives you something to start with that you don't have to go back and manually collect.
Jim or Dennis?
I mean, I would be remiss if I didn't say PagerDuty is a great platform to use all things incident response. But even like, you build out your technical services, your business services within PagerDuty, you can add a link to your runbook for your technical service. So like if anyone is responding to an incident directly on PagerDuty, you can see, oh, here's the runbook that is associated with things that might be going wrong with this service. So yeah, definitely check out all things PagerDuty as far as the process, but even like working within Datadog, like Dennis mentioned, if you're going to switch over to a different tool, it's helpful with when your incident management software works with you and not against you. So taking that information either to Slack or Datadog or whatever tool you end up using, that can be super, super helpful.
Gotcha. And then how do you guys determine customer impact? Do you guys have any tooling for determining the level of customer impact when you guys design SLOs or anything like that?
Well, I guess maybe not tooling so much, but there are a set of shared, understood guidelines for anyone rolling out a service in engineering. So we're usually based on like the severity of impact is number of customers and duration. So that kind of gets you you're mapping those against your like what kind of feature you're running, and we're assigning these in sort of like reliability tiers where like if you are a more important service, you have more potential to bring things down, or you are supporting more folks, then you'd have a tendency to have these sort of like higher priority or higher severity incidents associated with it.
Yeah, it's the same. It's pretty situationally dependent on what feature or product set they're working on. And then we have internal teams too that are like base layers. So like if those things go down, obviously that could impact multiple products. So it's pretty situationally dependent, but again, that's a good conversation with like the product managers themselves and understanding from the technical solutions, like, what is the impact? And it's okay just to ask that question if you're IC. The impact is all customers, the impact like 10% of customers. They don't have to be perfect numbers, but a general understanding.
Gotcha. So trying to quantify a bit the impact of services being down, services being less than available. And speaking of less than available, we talk a bunch about services being down. Do you guys have any tooling in place for services that aren't necessarily down, but maybe aren't operating at full capacity or are failing in a way outside of maybe a traditional signal?
I mean, yeah, certainly. Like percentages are pretty much everywhere in our product, or we at least have a way to measure percentage of failures. Particularly on the APIs, like, I could look up certain API and tell you what its failure rate is. Could be a simple bug, could be an actual outage situation, and generally gives you an idea of like, okay, quantity of customers, percentage of issue. Is it 25% instability on API calls, or is it like full hard down?
Yeah, like if
sorry, Jim.
Oh, go ahead. I was going to say, like, let's say you're using Kafka, you might want to monitor your lag that you're experiencing on a particular partition. And, that's one quick back of the envelope. You can say, we have one partition out of X, that's roughly translates to X customers. And yeah, like just making sure you're monitoring alerting based on that lag and not letting it slowly grow to a second and third and fourth partition that get delayed.
You have muted previously, Dennis. Do you have something else to add to that?
Yeah, I think like to your point about services that are not quite down, I think it's also important, like where you are setting your alerts, that you're not waiting till everything's on fire and completely down. Like for the measures that Cody and Jim said, you can set sort of like these incremental bounds, like, hey, if it's 5%, start paying attention. If it's 20%, like really start worrying. I think it's important not just to set one level and one set of severities. Having that granularity really helps you keep an eye on things and get ahead of before problems really get out of hand.
Cool.
Yeah, I was just gonna add that might be the trigger too that takes you from, this is just an incident for me and my team, I don't need to escalate to like a major incident response, but those thresholds that hit, this is now in major incident response territory. It's gone on for long enough, or it's affected enough customers where we should run our full incident response process, because not all incidents are the same, right? Some are, this one particular customer is having some issues. You might be able to address it, but you don't need to maybe call the fleet of major incident response. But yeah, there's certain definitely conditions that you get into that's like, all right, let's fire all the missiles. Let's put on the incident response playbook and let's get going.
Okay, so we do have a question that's been asked in multiple places. It's asking for the benefits of PagerDuty versus another vendor, but I'll give you guys a bit to maybe explain how PagerDuty fits effectively into dealing with incident response and kind of improving teams.
Dennis, I wasn't sure if you want to jump in first or not. But yeah, the way I see kind of PagerDuty fitting in, it's really nice to, again, like have a system that can work with all your tooling, kind of like Datadog, right? It has all the integrations where if you're coming from a traditional ticketing background, you can still use ServiceNow and PagerDuty complementary together, and use PagerDuty for more of the alerting and paging and escalations. And then like, as you kind of come into your PagerDuty journey, you might either replace things or use things that we build natively into the system. But yeah, I think where PagerDuty fits in nicely is the escalation is super helpful, right? If being able to set clear schedules and bring in alerts from all different systems, right? You might have Datadog alerts, you might have any sort of alert or alerting system you use, you can pretty much plug and play, which is super helpful. So I'd say it works complementary with something like ServiceNow, but it can also, do a full suite of things that maybe ServiceNow doesn't have the capabilities for yet.
Cool. So yeah, synergy. Everything works better together in an ecosystem. I do think, one of the great things for anybody who's had to be on call or who's had to deploy software or who's had to build software or been responsible for software over the past few years is just how much better tooling has gotten and how much less bad deploying and being responsible for software has gotten thanks to the much improved tools. We touched on it a bit earlier on, but having tools in place like mobile, having tools in place to where you can have a bit more of a life, you can have an on-call rotation that is formally scheduled and you don't need to think about it. You just need to look at your time, know when you need to be available, know when you need to show up. All of those things really contribute to a bit more psychological safety, a bit more space to know, okay, this is a thing I can manage, and this is a thing that is a boxed in unit of time, and I can be myself outside of that boxed in unit of time. Okay, I know, Dennis, you mentioned at the beginning, and I want to give you another chance to talk about the event data type and the event that you're building into PagerDuty. So do you mind explaining that one more time for me?
Sure. Yeah. To go over the idea of a change event. So, traditionally, PagerDuty and a lot of sort of incident response tooling has been very good at telling you like when something has gone wrong. Um, but in a lot of our customer research, talking to our customers, even from ourselves, when you do look at a lot of incidents, you can tie these back to like something that's actually changed. It's a code push, it's a deployment, it's a configuration change, and like the power of being able to kind of marry that kind of information where you have access to the change to when something goes wrong, you can start to put together a picture, a better landscape and understanding about like, say, hey, are these services risky? Are these types of changes risky? So, if we're coming back to the idea of on-call life, on-call quality, you can drive down that time that you need to try to figure out, hey, what happened? What's going on? What went wrong? When you have these things right at your fingertips, or perhaps like even towards the more, proactive side, can we do something about them? Or prevent these in a more systemic way. And that's what we hope to leverage by introducing change events to PagerDuty.
Gotcha. Very cool. And yes, speaking of PagerDuty, one of the launches today was the UI apps, and you guys actually launched with the UI apps. Either of you want to describe kind of the new functionality built into Datadog?
Sure, I'll take maybe the first one, Dennis. Maybe you can take your team's specific implementation, but yeah, like the ability to see the quick status. We have a status dashboard app that you can see and tie to a dashboard, and it can be super helpful, right? Like you come into an incident, you pull up Datadog, you can see, is this incident that I'm working on possibly affecting other services, business services or technical services within the system? And having that quick glimpse of like, okay, it's generally contained to my service, I can go about my day. But as we're talking about coordinating major incident response, if you see a couple other affected components, then you might have the idea like there's likely a major incident response that either needs to be spun up, or maybe that's the impetus to go check, has one been spun up? So it can be super helpful for a responder to just have that context as soon as you start the incident, to go into Datadog, have that widget open and see the full context of the situation.
Great. Yeah. And I think on a complementary note, the widget that our team worked on, it's called the instance widget. It gives you, I think, that team level granularity. So I think what Jim's referring to is sort of like that organizational context. And here you have something that's close to your team. So, as a responder, you're in the middle of triage. You don't want to break your focus to kind of jump between places, to either perform actions you could acknowledge or resolve within Datadog now through this widget. And you can also get, I think, your kind of your team level landscape about what's happening. So again, you don't have to leave your graphs. You don't have to break your triage. It's all there with you. Your tooling carries from page all the way through to triage.
Gotcha.
Yeah, and it can be helpful too. How many times do you acknowledge an incident, but maybe your time window lapses and you haven't, moved to resolve state, it repages you, goes to a triggered state. Being able to stay in Datadog and they acknowledge it, it can just be one less click, save you from a phone call or a noisy alarm. For
sure. And it looks like we have one last question. And again, thank you for everybody being here. Appreciate you. Appreciate Dennis, Jim, and Cody. From Brent, what have you found is helpful in driving improvements after an incident happens? And I'm sure everybody has something to say about that.
I think we have a special thing that we call this lessons learned and just like follow-up actions, usually this. So if there's something directly concrete, or even like need to investigate on how to prevent this in the future, we usually note it as follow-up action items. We use Jira, so we will create Jira cards internally for those and assign those to specific teams or people in some cases. And then second is like, you just generally have like a lessons learned attitude towards things, plus an actual Slack channel where you can like share these more broadly, like, oh, hey, this is a pretty common failure pattern that could affect a number of people. This is what we learned from this incident. And then broadcasting those postmortems throughout the org so that people can, basically read and learn about what happened and follow.
Yeah, I would say just being rigorous about making sure postmortems both happen and get scheduled. We have like a postmortems calendar that anyone in the org or even outside the org can join, for major incident and just learn that way, like conducting, having good conduction of the postmortem, both like pre-postmortem like actual meeting. Like there's a lot of work that obviously goes into figuring out what were the contributing factors and what the response looked like, lessons learned, improvements. So like I would say one, like be regular and be almost religious about scheduling and making sure that people know that these meetings are happening. And yeah, like the action items should be actionable. Like make sure everyone has clear guidance on this team is owning this specific piece that we thought could have been improved, and have follow-ups, right? Like if the team has an action item stemming from Sev 1, like that should be highest priority for the team. Yeah, I don't know if Dennis, you have anything else to add there?
Yeah, probably just to add on to the last point you made about like Sev 1s or high priorities. Like I think from a sort of like a team total service ownership model, having a shared understanding org-wide that, when these things happen, we do have priority and we do have sort of the autonomy to make these systemic fixes. It's not, we'll come and wait and get an opportunity to do them maybe in the future. I think having that alignment between, like, say, the product and engineering sides of the organization, that like when things happen, they need to be prioritized. It's really important to make that process really stick together.
Cool. Great. Thank you everybody for being here, and thanks for everybody attending. Enjoy the rest of Dash.
Thank you.
Bye everybody.
Thanks, folks.